Late summer 2024, a surveillance camera inside a Houston apartment captured a moment that would become the final chapter of a young woman's life. A man appeared at her door. She let him in. Minutes later, the camera recorded him leaving. Calm, unhurried. The woman inside never walked out again. For 2 days, silence. No calls answered, no texts returned, just stillness behind a locked door. Then came the phone call. An anonymous male voice contacted apartment management. "There's a body in her unit." Then he hung up. No name, no explanation, no reason to call, unless he already knew what was inside. Her name was Pandey, 21 years old, a nursing student from Nepal who had crossed oceans to build a future. Friends described her as cautious, safety conscious, so aware of danger that she installed that camera herself, pointed at her door because she felt like someone was watching her. The camera was supposed to keep her safe. Instead, it captured her final moments. When police released a still image from the footage, a tipster recognized the man from a sugar daddy dating profile. That tip led detectives to Bobby Singh Shah, 51 years old. Prosecutors allege he had known Muna for months and purchased a handgun just hours before her death. He now faces capital murder charges, and one question haunts investigators. Why would the man who allegedly killed her call it in himself? This is the story of a door that opened for the wrong person, a camera that became a witness, and a family still waiting for justice. If cases like this matter to you, subscribe now. And tell me in the comments, why do you think he made that call?
21-year-old Pandey from Nepal had dreams of becoming a nurse. We've been working to get answers for her loved ones and the community after she was found shot to death inside her apartment last week.
To understand what was lost, you first have to understand who Pandey was before that camera recorded her final moments. She was born in Nepal, raised in a close-knit family that valued education, hard work, and the quiet dignity of service to others. From a young age, Muna dreamed of becoming a nurse, not for the prestige, not for the money, but because she genuinely wanted to help people. She saw healthcare as a calling, a way to make a tangible difference in the lives of strangers who needed compassion during their most vulnerable moments. That dream carried her across oceans. At 21 years old, Muna left everything familiar behind: her parents, her siblings, the rhythms of home, and moved to Houston, Texas to pursue a nursing degree. It was a bold decision for someone so young. A foreign country, a massive city, a language and culture that demanded constant adaptation. But Muna was determined. She enrolled in classes, secured a part-time job to cover expenses, and settled into a modest apartment where she could study in peace. Her life in Houston was structured around routine: classes during the week, shifts at work, video calls with family back in Nepal, bridging the distance with stories and reassurances that she was doing well. She had a boyfriend, someone she cared about, though the details of that relationship remained largely private. She also had a small circle of friends, other students, co-workers, people who admired her quiet focus and gentle demeanor. Those who knew her described Muna as soft-spoken, reserved, the kind of person who listened more than she talked, who observed before she acted. But beneath that calm exterior was a young woman acutely aware of her surroundings. Perhaps it was the instinct of someone living alone in a new country. Perhaps it was something more specific, because in the weeks before her death, Muna confided in friends that she felt uneasy. She couldn't quite articulate it, a feeling, a sense that something was off. She mentioned feeling watched, though she never identified who or why. It was the kind of admission that friends might dismiss as paranoia, the natural anxiety of a young woman living alone in a big city far from home. But Muna didn't dismiss it. Instead, she took action. She purchased a small surveillance camera and installed it inside her apartment, positioned to capture anyone who approached her front door. It was a practical solution, a layer of protection that might offer peace of mind. If something happened, if someone tried to enter uninvited, there would be a record. There would be proof. She told people the camera made her feel safer. She never imagined it would become the primary witness to her own death. Looking back, the installation of that camera raises questions that investigators would later struggle to answer. What prompted her unease? Was she being followed, contacted by someone who made her uncomfortable? Had she encountered the man who would eventually appear at her door and sensed something dangerous beneath the surface? The answers remain unclear, But one thing is certain, Muna Pandey trusted her instincts enough to prepare for the worst. She just didn't prepare for the possibility that danger wouldn't break in. It would knock, and she would open the door. If she felt unsafe in those final weeks, who exactly was she afraid of? The weekend of Muna's death began like any other. Saturday arrived with the usual rhythms. Muna attended to her responsibilities, exchanged messages with friends, and likely spoke with family back in Nepal. For a young woman balancing school, work, and the pressures of building a life in a foreign country, weekends offered a rare window of rest, a chance to catch up on sleep, prepare for the week ahead, and maintain the connections that kept her grounded despite the distance. Those who communicated with her that day noticed nothing unusual. Her messages were normal, unremarkable, the kind of brief exchanges that occur between busy people. Check-ins, casual updates, the small talk that fills the spaces between more significant conversations. Then the messages stopped. At some point on Saturday night, Muna Pandey went silent. Her phone stopped sending texts. Calls went unanswered. The digital presence that had connected her to the people who cared about her simply vanished. At first, no one thought much of it. People get busy, phones die, plans change. There were 100 innocent explanations for a few hours of silence. But the hours stretched into Sunday, and Sunday stretched into Monday. By the time Monday arrived, concern had begun to ripple through Muna's small circle. She hadn't shown up for class, she hadn't appeared at work. The friends who had expected to hear from her over the weekend were met with nothing but an empty void where her voice should have been. Still, there was hesitation. Young people sometimes disappear for a day or two. Maybe she was sick. Maybe she had traveled somewhere unexpectedly. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation that would reveal itself once she resurfaced. But Muna wasn't the type to vanish without warning. She was responsible, communicative, the kind of person who kept her commitments and notified people if plans changed. For her to simply stop responding, to miss obligations without explanation, it was out of character. Deeply out of character. Meanwhile, inside her apartment, time passed in silence. Whatever happened behind that door on Saturday night had already occurred. The camera she installed had already recorded what it recorded, and the woman who had carefully positioned it to protect herself was no longer able to check its footage, no longer able to call for help, no longer able to tell anyone what she had seen or experienced. Her phone was missing. That detail would later prove significant. Whoever visited Muna that night had taken the device, the one object that might have contained call logs, messages, and evidence of prior contact. Its absence suggested intention. Someone wanted to sever the connection between Muna and the outside world, to erase whatever digital trail might lead investigators toward the truth. But they couldn't erase everything. They couldn't erase the camera, and they couldn't erase the fact that Muna Pandey had people who cared enough to notice when she disappeared. By Monday, the silence had become deafening. Friends were worried. Family in Nepal, unable to reach their daughter, grew frantic. The young woman who had crossed the world to pursue her dreams had stopped answering, and no one knew why. This was the moment her life stopped being normal, and the moment the investigation that would follow truly began. 2 days after Muna Pandey was last seen alive, the phone rang at her apartment complex's management office. The caller was male. His voice was calm, direct, and utterly devoid of emotion. He delivered a single piece of information that would shatter any hope that Muna had simply gone somewhere unexpectedly. There's a body in her unit. Then he hung up. No name, no callback number, no explanation for how he knew what he knew or why he was calling. Just those 6 words, delivered with the detachment of someone reporting a minor maintenance issue rather than a human tragedy.
On Monday, police say they received an anonymous call telling them there was a body inside of her apartment unit. Once inside, prosecutors say police found her body.
The apartment manager, understandably shaken, immediately contacted authorities. Within the hour, Houston police officers arrived at the complex to perform a welfare check on the small apartment where Muna Pandey had tried to build a life far from home. They knocked first. Standard procedure. No response. They announced themselves, called out her name, waited for any sound of movement from inside. Nothing. When officers finally entered the apartment, they found what the anonymous caller had promised. Muna Pandey was deceased. The young nursing student who had dreamed of helping others, who had installed a camera because she felt unsafe, who had crossed oceans to pursue an education, She was gone. The scene presented immediate contradictions. There was no sign of forced entry. The door had not been kicked in. The locks had not been broken. The windows had not been shattered. Whoever entered that apartment had been let inside willingly. Muna had opened the door for them. There was also no obvious sign of a violent struggle. No overturned furniture. No defensive wounds consistent with a prolonged fight. Whatever happened inside that apartment had occurred quickly, or had involved someone Muna felt comfortable enough with that she didn't perceive a threat until it was too late. These details transformed the investigation immediately. This wasn't a random break-in. This wasn't a stranger who forced his way inside looking for valuables. This was something far more personal, far more calculated. Someone Muna knew, or at least someone she trusted enough to admit, had walked through her front door and ended her life. But the most disturbing question wasn't how she died. It was the phone call. Why would someone call in the body? Why would the person responsible, assuming the caller was connected to the crime, want Muna to be found? Killers typically flee. They hide evidence, create distance, establish alibis. They don't phone apartment managers to announce what they've done, unless they had a reason. Unless discovery was part of the plan. Investigators would spend weeks trying to understand the logic behind that call. Was it guilt? Arrogance? A calculated move to control the timeline of discovery before someone else stumbled onto the scene? The motivations remained unclear, but one thing was certain. Someone wanted Muna Pandey found. And whoever made that call knew exactly what was waiting inside. Within hours of discovering Muna's body, investigators turned their attention to the device she had installed weeks earlier. The small surveillance camera pointed at her front door. It was still there, still functioning, still recording. Whatever the killer had taken from that apartment, her phone, possibly other items, they had either overlooked the camera or underestimated what it contained. Perhaps they didn't notice it. Perhaps they assumed it wasn't connected to cloud storage. Perhaps in the urgency of departure, they simply forgot. Whatever the reason, it was a mistake that would cost them everything. Detectives retrieved the footage and began reviewing the hours leading up to Muna's death. What they found was chilling in its clarity. Saturday night. A man approaches the apartment door. The camera captures him clearly. His build, his clothing, his face. He doesn't force his way in. He doesn't skulk or hide from view. He walks up to the door with the confidence of someone who expects to be admitted. And he is. The door opens. He enters. The footage continues to record, but now there is nothing to see but the closed door and the empty hallway beyond it. Whatever happens inside that apartment over the next several minutes occurs beyond the camera's view. Then, later, the man reappears. He's leaving now. Calm. Methodical. He carries items with him. Objects investigators would later catalog as potential evidence. His demeanor is unhurried, as though he has all the time in the world. He doesn't run. He doesn't look over his shoulder. He simply walks away, disappearing from the frame and into the Houston night. Muna Pandey never appears again. The footage provided investigators with exactly what they needed: visual confirmation of the last person to see Muna alive. But it also raised questions that the recording couldn't answer. Who was this man? How did he know Muna? Why had she opened the door for him without hesitation? The camera had captured his face, but not his identity. It had recorded his presence, but not his motive. It had documented the final visitor to Muna's apartment, but it couldn't explain the relationship that had brought him there, or the violence that occurred once the door closed behind him. Still, investigators now had something concrete. They had an image, a face, a physical description that could be circulated, matched against databases, shown to witnesses who might recognize the man walking calmly away from a crime scene. The surveillance camera that Muna installed to protect herself had failed to save her life, but it had captured the evidence that might bring her killer to justice. The footage was extracted, enhanced, and prepared for distribution. Detectives knew that someone, somewhere, would recognize this man. In a city of millions, all they needed was one person to see the image and make the connection. That single frame was about to change everything. Houston police made a calculated decision. Rather than keep the surveillance footage internal, hoping to identify the suspect through databases and traditional investigative methods, they released a still image to the public. It was a clear shot of the man's face. The same man captured on Muna's camera, the same man who had walked through her door on the night she died. The image circulated quickly, Local news stations broadcast it. Social media amplified it. The face of a potential killer was suddenly visible to millions of people, any one of whom might hold the key to his identity. The tip came faster than investigators expected. A woman contacted authorities after seeing the image. She recognized him, she said. Not from the neighborhood, not from any connection to Muna Pandey. She recognized him from a dating website, specifically a sugar daddy dating platform. The woman explained that she had encountered the man's profile while browsing the site. His photos matched the surveillance image almost exactly. Same face, same features, same person. She provided investigators with the profile information, including the name associated with the account. Bobby Singh Shah, 51 years old. Detectives ran the name through their systems and quickly built a preliminary picture of the suspect. Shah was not a stranger to Muna Pandey, a detail that would emerge through digital forensics and witness interviews over the following days. Prosecutors would later allege that the two had known each other for months, connected through circumstances that investigators were still piecing together. The nature of their relationship remained disputed. The defense would eventually suggest intimacy. Prosecutors would characterize it differently, a connection marked by financial imbalance and possible exploitation. But regardless of how their relationship began, it had ended with Muna dead in her apartment and Shah captured on camera walking away.
Prosecutors state they got another tip from a woman who identified Shah as the man in the surveillance photo. The woman claims she first met Shah in 2012 after connecting with him through a sugar daddy website.
The tip from the dating website accomplished what traditional methods might have taken weeks to achieve. A stranger, someone with no connection to the victim or the crime, had recognized a face and picked up the phone. The digital world that Shah had navigated, the platforms where he presented himself to potential companions, had exposed him in ways he never anticipated. He had carefully removed Muna's phone from the scene, severing her digital connections to the outside world. But he couldn't delete his own online presence. He couldn't erase the profile photos that matched his face. And he couldn't anticipate that a stranger scrolling through a dating website would see a news bulletin, make a connection, and provide investigators with exactly the lead they needed. Within days of the tip, Bobby Singh Shah became the primary suspect in Muna Pandey's murder. Detectives gathered evidence, built their case, and prepared to make an arrest that would answer some questions, while raising many others. The camera had captured his face. The public had provided his name. Now it was time to bring him into custody and begin the long process of seeking justice for a young woman who had trusted the wrong person. As investigators dug deeper into the relationship between Muna Pandey and Bobby Singh Shah, a troubling picture began to emerge. This was not a chance encounter. This was not a stranger who appeared at her door uninvited. The connection between the 21-year-old nursing student and the 51-year-old man stretched back months before her death. Prosecutors would later allege that Shah had known Muna for an extended period, long enough to establish a pattern of contact, long enough to build whatever trust had compelled her to open the door that night without hesitation. The exact nature of their initial meeting remained somewhat obscured by conflicting accounts, but digital evidence and witness statements painted a picture of ongoing communication between two people whose lives should never have intersected. The defense, meanwhile, hinted at something different. They suggested intimacy, a relationship that went beyond casual acquaintance. The implication was clear. Shah and Muna had been involved romantically, or at least had engaged in a connection that both parties entered willingly. If true, this framing might complicate the prosecution's narrative, introducing questions about motive, consent, and the circumstances that led to her death. But prosecutors pushed back against this characterization. They pointed to the significant imbalance between the two. Shah was 51, established, financially stable. Muna was 21, a student working part-time to support herself while pursuing her nursing degree in a foreign country. The power differential was stark. Whatever relationship existed between them, prosecutors argued, was not one of equals. The word that hovered around the case, never fully spoken but always implied, was exploitation. A young woman, far from home, limited resources, a man 30 years her senior with money and access. The dynamics suggested a transactional element, a connection where one party held significantly more power than the other. Whether Muna had entered this arrangement willingly or had been manipulated into it remained a matter of dispute. But one thing was certain: the randomness had evaporated from the narrative. This was not a burglary gone wrong. This was not a stranger who picked a target at random. This was someone who had cultivated access to Muna's life, someone who knew her routines, someone she trusted enough to admit into her home on a Saturday night. The betrayal cut deeper than violence alone. Muna had installed that camera because she felt watched, because something in her environment had triggered alarm. Had she sensed the danger that Shah represented? Had there been warning signs she couldn't quite articulate? Or had the threat been so carefully disguised that she never saw it coming? Until it was too late, the answers remained elusive, but the connection was undeniable. Whatever happened in that apartment, it was personal. The evidence of premeditation arrived in the form of a single purchase. According to court documents, Bobby Singh Shah acquired a handgun just hours before Muna Pandey's death. Not days, not weeks, hours. The timeline was damning. He had walked into a store, completed the transaction, and obtained the weapon on the same day he appeared at her apartment door. Prosecutors seized on this detail immediately. The gun purchase suggested that whatever happened in Muna's apartment was not spontaneous. It was not an argument that escalated unexpectedly. It was not a moment of passion that spiraled beyond control. Shah had armed himself before arriving. He had prepared for what would follow. The theory of premeditation transformed the case. If Shah had planned this in advance, if he had deliberately obtained a weapon knowing he would use it that night, then the crime shifted from tragic to calculated. This was not a man who lost control. This was a man who made decisions, who followed steps, who executed a plan with the cold efficiency of someone who had thought it through. The defense would later attempt to complicate this narrative, to introduce alternative explanations for the gun purchase, to suggest that timing alone did not prove intent. But the proximity was difficult to explain away. Hours, not days. The weapon was fresh, the receipt recent, the connection to Muna's death almost impossibly close. Investigators also examined what happened to the gun after the crime. Had he disposed of it? Hidden it? Was it recovered during the subsequent investigation? The details of the weapon's journey after that night remained part of the evidentiary record, another piece of the puzzle that prosecutors would present in their case against Shah. But the purchase itself spoke volumes. It suggested that Shah had crossed a line long before he knocked on Muna's door. The decision to harm her hadn't been made in her apartment. It had been made earlier in a store when he handed over money and walked out with a weapon he allegedly intended to use. The gun represented intent, and intent separated tragedy from murder. For Muna's family, for the investigators building the case, for anyone following the story, the gun purchase answered one question while raising another. The question of premeditation seemed settled, but the question of why this man had decided to end this young woman's life, remained as elusive as ever. What had happened between them that led to this moment? What had she done or refused to do that triggered such violence? Or was there no rational explanation at all? Bobby Singh Shah was taken into custody and charged with capital murder in the death of Muna Pandey. The arrest came after days of intensive investigation fueled by surveillance footage, public tips, digital forensics, and the mounting evidence that connected Shah to the crime. When officers apprehended him, they executed search warrants that yielded additional evidence, multiple electronic devices that would be analyzed for communications, location data, and any records of his relationship with the victim. The devices represented a potential gold mine for prosecutors. If Shah had communicated with Muna in the days and weeks before her death, those messages might reveal the nature of their connection. If he had searched for information about weapons, about disposing of evidence, about any detail related to the crime, those searches would be logged. Digital forensics had become one of the most powerful tools in modern investigations, and Shah's devices promised to fill in gaps that surveillance footage and witness testimony could not. The capital murder charge itself carried enormous weight. In Texas, capital murder is reserved for the most severe cases, killings that meet specific criteria involving premeditation, circumstances, or victim characteristics. The charge signaled that prosecutors viewed this case with the utmost seriousness, that they believed the evidence supported not just a murder conviction, but the most severe classification available under state law. For Muna's family, the arrest offered a measure of relief. The man they believed responsible for their daughter's death was in custody. He would face the justice system. He would be forced to answer for what had happened in that apartment. After days of silence, confusion, and grief, there was finally a name, a face, and a legal process that might bring accountability. But relief was not resolution. An arrest is not a conviction. A charge is not a verdict. The legal process that would follow, the hearings, the motions, the trial itself, would take months, possibly years. Shah was entitled to a defense, entitled to challenge the evidence, entitled to the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. Justice felt close, but it was not complete. The arrest was a beginning, not an ending. The camera had captured the evidence. The public had provided the identification. The investigators had built the case. Now the courts would determine whether that case was strong enough to hold a man accountable for the death of a young woman who had crossed oceans to pursue her dreams. The waiting had only just begun. As of the latest court reporting, no trial verdict has been reached. Bobby Singh Shah remains charged with capital murder. The legal process continues. For Muna Pandey's family, the waiting has become its own form of suffering. Their daughter is gone. The man accused of killing her sits in custody. And the justice they desperately seek remains suspended, deferred, just out of reach. The case stands as a chilling reminder that justice is not instantaneous. It is not delivered the moment a crime is discovered. It is not guaranteed by surveillance footage or public tips or the accumulation of evidence. Justice is a process, slow and deliberate, bound by procedures designed to protect the rights of the accused, even as it seeks accountability for the victim. That process can take months, years, sometimes longer. For Muna's family in Nepal, each day without resolution is another day of grief without closure. They cannot move forward. They cannot fully mourn. They are trapped in the liminal space between loss and justice, waiting for a verdict that may still be far away. But Muna's voice has not been entirely silenced. The camera she installed, the device meant to protect her, became the instrument of her testimony. It captured the face of the man who walked through her door. It preserved the evidence that would identify him, arrest him, charge him. In death, Muna became her own witness, providing the proof that her instincts had been right all along. She had felt watched. She had sensed danger. She had taken steps to protect herself. And though those steps could not save her life, they ensured that her death would not go uninvestigated, that the man responsible would not simply vanish into anonymity. The story of Muna Pandey is not finished. The trial still looms. The verdict remains unwritten. The justice her family seeks is still pending, caught in the slow machinery of courts and procedures and legal arguments. But the evidence remains. The footage remains. The memory of a young woman who crossed oceans to pursue her dreams remains. Someday, a courtroom will render its judgment. Someday, the waiting will end. Until then, her family holds on to hope. Hope that the system will work. Hope that accountability will arrive. Hope that their daughter's life and her death will ultimately matter. If not now, when does justice arrive? For Muna Pandey, the answer is still being written. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more cases that deserve to be told. And in the comments, share your thoughts. In cases like this, where justice is delayed, how do we honor the victims who are still waiting?